There is a room deep inside Thornwall Palace that has no windows. No natural light has ever touched its walls. The air inside it is controlled, filtered, and kept at exactly 11 degrees. And behind its 2-ton platinum-reinforced door sits a collection of jewels, crowns, and sealed royal documents so valuable that even the king himself cannot enter without the sign-off of 3 separate crown lawyers. For decades, that room stayed locked, undisturbed, forgotten by everyone except the handful of people who knew it existed. Then one morning, the queen asked for the door to be opened, and everything, the palace, the monarchy, the royal marriage at its center, began to fall apart. The kingdom of Thornwall had survived wars, famines, and the quiet kind of scandals that royal families hide behind oil paintings and official silences. It had stood for 400 years on the strength of its institutions, its parliament, its courts, its church, and above all, its crown lawyers, a small but ferociously powerful legal body whose job was not to serve the monarch personally, but to protect the crown itself. The crown and the person who wore it were, in the tradition of Thornwall, 2 entirely separate things. A king could make mistakes, the crown could not. King Aldric of Thornwall understood this distinction better than most. He had been raised on it. His father, King Geraint, had drilled it into him from boyhood that the monarchy was not a person, not a family, not a collection of feelings and desires. It was an institution, and institutions required rules. They required lawyers. They required, above everything else, the kind of discipline that prevented even the most well-meaning impulse from becoming a constitutional disaster. He had repeated this lesson to himself many times over the years. He repeated it again on the morning that his wife, Queen Meridian, made her request about the Platinum Vault. The vault had been built in 1889 by King Aldric's great-great-grandfather, King Aldous II, after a fire nearly destroyed a significant portion of the royal collections housed at the time in a wooden annex of the old East Wing. The lesson of that fire was taken seriously. A new structure was commissioned, not inside the main palace, but beneath it, accessed through a narrow staircase that descended behind the library's false back wall. The construction took 6 years. When it was complete, the vault was lined with platinum sheeting, fitted with a temperature regulation system decades ahead of its time, and sealed with a door mechanism that required simultaneous operation of 2 separate key systems held by 2 separate crown lawyers. Nothing went in without legal documentation. Nothing came out without a court-reviewed request. Over the generations, the vault had become the kingdom's most secure repository. Inside it sat pieces of extraordinary value, ceremonial crowns worn at coronations stretching back 2 centuries, the original treaty parchments that had ended Thornwall's most devastating border conflict in 1743, a collection of privately commissioned jewels belonging to several former queens, and a sealed chest whose contents had been entered into the vault's inventory in 1924 under the notation Personal Effects, Queen Solara, and had not been opened since. Nobody alive knew exactly what was inside that chest. The lawyers' records described it simply as sealed by royal instruction, not to be opened without a formal order from the reigning sovereign and approval of the full crown legal panel. Queen Meridian had learned about that chest from an old handwritten journal she found tucked inside a box of unsorted royal correspondence that had been moved from the East Wing archive to the library 3 months earlier. The journal belonged to a royal household secretary who had served during the late reign of King Aldric's grandfather. It was not an official document. It had no stamp, no filing reference, no chain of custody. But the secretary had written in it with candid detail, describing her days, her duties, and occasionally the things she was not supposed to see. On page 47 of the journal, she described being present on a November afternoon when a sealed chest was brought to the vault. She did not know its contents, but she had overheard something she clearly found significant enough to commit to paper. A senior palace official telling a crown lawyer that the chest contained documents that, if made public, would change the known history of the Thornwall succession. Queen Meridian read that passage 4 times before she set the journal down. She brought it to King Aldric that evening after dinner in the small sitting room they used for private conversations, one of the few spaces in the palace where no household staff were present. She laid the journal open on the low table between them and pointed to the passage without speaking. He read it. Then he read it again. Then he set the journal down in almost exactly the same motion she had used. "That could mean anything," he said. "It could," she agreed. "But you are the reigning sovereign. You have the right to order the vault opened. You have the right to review the contents of anything stored inside it. Whatever is in that chest, it belongs to your reign to know." He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "I will speak to Caldwell in the morning," meaning Lord Caldwell, the chief crown lawyer who had held that position for 22 years and whose institutional knowledge of Thornwall's legal framework was considered, by those who worked alongside him, to be nothing short of encyclopedic. Lord Caldwell's response, delivered the following afternoon in a formal memorandum marked private and confidential, was not what either of them expected. The memorandum ran to 11 pages. Its essential position was that the vault's founding charter, established in 1889 and reaffirmed by legal instrument in 1952, placed specific restrictions on the circumstances under which vault contents could be accessed. The reigning sovereign did have the right to request access, but the Crown Legal Panel, not the sovereign alone, held the authority to approve or deny that request, based on a review of whether the retrieval served the constitutional interest of the Crown. This was not a new clause. It had always been there. It had simply never been tested before, because no reigning sovereign had ever attempted to open the vault for anything other than formal ceremonial preparations. Furthermore, Lord Caldwell wrote, the specific request as submitted to access a sealed personal chest of indeterminate content based on an unofficial private journal entry of unverified authorship did not, in the panel's preliminary view, meet the threshold for constitutional necessity. The panel would be willing to hear a formal petition, but in the current form the request could not be approved. Queen Meridian read the memorandum standing at the window of the morning room. When she finished, she folded it carefully, placed it on the desk, and was silent for a full minute. Then she said, quietly but with absolute clarity, "They have blocked me." The palace did not announce this. Royal legal disputes of this nature were not press releases. They were internal. They were handled in memoranda and formal channels and conversations that left no record in the household diary. But palaces are not truly private places. They are institutions full of people, and people notice things, the changed atmosphere in a corridor, the lengthened silences at formal dinners, the way a queen who is usually warm and composed begins to hold herself with a new kind of controlled stillness. Within 2 weeks, word had reached the outer circles of the royal household, the senior staff, the private secretaries, the palace chaplain, that something was wrong. Not wrong in the obvious, dramatic way that ended up in newspapers. Wrong in the old palace way, where everything on the surface remained immaculate and the tension underneath pressed against every surface like a slow and silent pressure. King Aldrich found himself in an impossible position. He was not an indifferent man, and he was not an unkind husband. He understood why Meridian wanted what she wanted. The journal entry was tantalizing. The possibility that his family's succession history contained an undisclosed chapter, he was not immune to that. It unsettled him too. But he was also, at his core, an institutional man. He had been trained to trust the crown lawyers. He had been taught that their authority existed precisely to protect the monarchy from the kind of impulsive decision that felt right in a private sitting room at night, but could unravel something irreplaceable by morning. He submitted the formal petition that Lord Caldwell had suggested. He did it properly, through the correct channels, with the correct documentation, citing the sovereign's right of review under the 1889 Charter. He did not override the panel. He did not invoke emergency privilege. He waited. Meridian waited too, but her waiting was different from his. Hers had an edge to it. She began to ask questions, careful questions, phrased as intellectual curiosity rather than challenge, about the history of the Crown Legal Panel itself. She inquired about past instances where vault access had been requested. She asked the palace archivist to pull records relating to King Aldous II's original instructions for the vault's founding charter. She was not, technically, doing anything wrong. She was a queen. She had the right to review historical records. But the archivist, a discreet man named Mr. Henwick, who had worked in that position for 30 years, noticed the pattern of the requests, and he mentioned it quietly to Lord Caldwell during a routine filing review. Lord Caldwell did not escalate it immediately. He was a careful man. He monitored. The formal petition review took 6 weeks. 6 weeks in which the palace continued its public schedule, the state visits, the charity engagements, the seasonal appearances that were the visible life of the monarchy, while its internal atmosphere quietly tightened. King Aldrich attended every engagement. Queen Meridian attended most of them. At official dinners, they sat together, spoke to their guests with practiced warmth, and presented the image of a harmonious partnership with the flawless ease that decades of royal training produced. Privately, their conversations had grown shorter. Not cold, they were too disciplined for cold, but compressed. The easy spaciousness of their usual private life had contracted into something more careful. The panel's ruling arrived on a Thursday morning. 11 pages again. This time the answer was different, but not in the way Meridian had hoped. The panel approved access to the vault for the purpose of a formal inventory review. They did not approve opening the sealed chest. The chest, they ruled, was protected under a specific subclause of the 1952 reaffirmation instrument, which held that any item sealed under explicit royal instruction by a previous sovereign could not be opened by a successor without either a documented statement of constitutional necessity or the approval of all 5 sitting members of the Crown legal panel by unanimous vote. 2 of the 5 had voted against opening it. The ruling stood. The vault door could be opened. The chest would remain sealed. Queen Meridian read this ruling in the same morning room, at the same window, in the same standing position as before. This time, when she finished, she did not fold it. She set it on the desk and left the room without speaking. It was Lord Caldwell who came to King Aldrich that afternoon, uninvited, requesting a private audience. He was admitted to the library. He sat across from the king and spoke without preamble, which was characteristic of him. He was a man who considered preamble a form of dishonesty. "Your Majesty," he said, "I want to make something plain which I think may have been obscured in the formality of our recent correspondence. The panel's ruling is not a judgment on the Queen. It is not a political act. It is a constitutional obligation. If we were to approve access to that chest on the basis of a privately held journal of unverified origin, we would be establishing a precedent that could be used to justify vault access for any reason by any future sovereign. The vault exists precisely to prevent that. Its restrictions are its value." King Aldrich looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "She doesn't believe that." "I understand," Lord Caldwell said, "but your Majesty believes it, and in matters of the crown your belief is the one that ultimately governs." The king did not answer that. He stood and walked to the window that looked out onto the palace gardens. It was a gray afternoon. The hedgerows were very precisely trimmed. Everything outside was exactly as it was supposed to be. "There is something in that chest," he said. "Whatever it is, it has been sealed there for over 100 years. My family knew it was there. My grandfather knew, my father. None of them opened it." "No, sir." "Do you know what it is?" Lord Caldwell paused. It was a brief pause, but it was perceptible. "The inventory notation is as you have seen it. I do not have access to the contents. No sitting member of the panel does. Only the original sealing instructions, which we hold and which were issued by Queen Solara directly." King Aldrich turned from the window. "And the sealing instructions, do they give any indication of why?" "They give one line," Lord Caldwell said, "sealed for the protection of those who follow." The room was very quiet after that. Outside, a bird passed the window. The garden remained still. King Aldrich sat down again. He did not speak for some time. When he did, his voice was measured and low. "Then we will not open it." Lord Caldwell nodded. "Yes, sir." "And you will need to speak to the Queen directly. She deserves that, not another memorandum." "I will arrange it." That meeting between Lord Caldwell and Queen Meridian lasted 45 minutes. No record was kept of what was said between them. What the household staff observed afterward was that the Queen walked from that meeting back to her private rooms with the same composed bearing she always carried. No visible sign of distress, no alteration in the straightness of her posture, no crack in the surface. She sent no messages that evening. She canceled one engagement the following morning, citing a minor health concern. She returned to her full schedule the day after that. Over the following weeks, the internal atmosphere of the palace slowly, carefully began to decompress. The compressed silences lengthened back into conversation. The dinners became warmer. Whatever Meridian had made of the lawyer's private words to her, she kept it entirely within herself. She never raised the vault again in any conversation that anyone recorded or remembered. The formal petition was closed. The ruling stood. The chest remained sealed. But something had shifted, subtly and permanently, in the way the palace understood itself. The vault had always been a fact of life at Thornwall, a feature of the building like the turrets and the flagstones, unremarkable in its permanence. Now it was something else. Now it was a known unknown. Everyone who had been present in those 6 weeks, the senior staff, the private secretaries, Lord Caldwell, the 5 members of the Crown panel, now carried the same quiet awareness that somewhere beneath the library, behind a false wall, down a narrow staircase, inside a 2-ton platinum-reinforced door, there was a sealed chest. And inside that sealed chest was something that a queen who loved her king, who had sat beside him at 100 state dinners and 10,000 quiet evenings, had wanted badly enough to petition the full Crown legal panel, and lost. The chest stayed sealed, the vault stayed locked, the palace carried on. And the one line from the original sealing instructions, sealed for the protection of those who follow, lived in Lord Caldwell's memory like a splinter that could not be removed, because it sat just deep enough beneath the surface that removing it would cause more damage than leaving it alone. That is the nature of things that monarchies bury. They do not disappear, they simply wait, patient as platinum, cold as stone, certain as the dark.